Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming to, I'm not going to say it's our last, because we will tell and have town halls as long as we need to keep our community informed, but certainly our last one in August. Commissioner Ellis is wanting to give you an update where we are in our budgeting process. And there's been a lot of information back and forth from various sources, but we hope to tell you the straight up information on how we got here, the challenges we're facing, and what we're moving forward. As you know, there's Commissioners Court tomorrow, Tuesday, August 26th. So there will be more budget and tax discussion tomorrow, and then there are hearings, and then there are at least two more meetings. So we're right in the thick of it, and we hope you'll find this valuable. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. My name is Erica Lee Carter. I am Commissioner Ellis's Policy Director. You will hear from him shortly, and then you'll hear from some of the members of our policy team. We have cards, so as you're going through, so you don't forget your question, please write it down. But we will take questions, and we probably will go through it mainly and not stop as much, so that we don't delay, and then we get to your questions. I know our commissioner is walking here, so I'm going to let him come in so he can give you a greeting. This budget process started definitely back in May. So we've been working on it all summer, but every month we get new information, and so we've had to adapt and try to work with our departments that are serving you, the residents, provide outstanding services to our community. Commissioner Ellis believes that the budget reflects our values, and that it's almost a moral document, and that it's so important to pay attention. If there are no dollars for housing or to address those who are victims of domestic violence, then are we really believing in that, doing that, serving you all who may have those needs? So we hope through some of this data and your questions, you will understand where our values are in Harris County. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of Harris County Precinct 1, the best commissioner west of the Mississippi, from Sunnyside, Rodney Ellis.
Thank you all for being here. If I had paid attention when my staff was briefing me earlier today, I could stay all evening, but I didn't pay as much attention as I should have, so I got to go read the stuff that they wrote, so I'll be prepared for tomorrow. But this will be an informative session to give you a sense of what's in our budget, so you make judgments about what we can do. I would say this to you, that in many ways we are constrained because the state of Texas puts a cap on how much growth we can take, even if property values go up. And generally they do in our region. But we do not have a cap on how many people come in. It's a great place to live despite challenges, even if sometimes it floods, even if sometimes it snows, even if on a day like today it was 107 degrees, maybe because my car was sitting in the sun all day. People want to be here, and that's a good thing. But we are constrained because the state puts a cap on how much growth we can have. And then the cap says in certain areas for law enforcement, no matter what happens with crime, you can never reduce that part of the budget. And I think if you take boots on the ground, 38, 40%, which one, Sophie? Boots on the ground? Boots on the ground, 36%. Of the general operating budget for the county. A little over a third of it. If you take everything involved in that, the DA's office, the courts, the jail, operating it, it ought to get to, I'd say, Erica, 60%. Not all of that is frozen, and you can never reduce it, but at least 36% of it is. So it means the rest of it is what we do for your parks, for pollution control, for health services, all of the other things that we do. Harris Center, Old Hospital District, that's separate. That's a separate budget. But the preventive things we do, your immunizations and all those things that the Harris County Health Department does, we still have to operate, and we have to take it out of that money. Now, it is interesting. We have to take money from the most painful way to get it from you. Property taxes. The state's budget comes from sales tax. It is interesting They don't put a cap on how much sales tax they can take, but they put a cap on us. And you see us, we're right here. We're the closest one to you. So that's a challenge, but we are restrained by that. We are required to have a balanced budget, and we will have a balanced budget. Now, here's my sense. I don't think you can come in and clear up a hole of about $200 million without feeling it. We spent a lot of money with various consulting groups to help us come up with efficiencies. Some of them we didn't take because it may be painful for us to do some of those things. But we spent a lot of money on that. I just don't think you can find enough efficiencies. We're going to do some things that you're going to feel, and we're going to get through it. And then next year, in this budget, we have some, shall we call them, one-time mechanisms. You used to call it smoke and mirrors. You sell a building, you bring in some money. You bank on certain federal grants you have now, you probably won't have in the next cycle. So we'll have to cross that bridge in the next year. I've always thought coming out of state government, well, it's a 2-year budget cycle. I remember when I had the good fortune of being finance chair in 2001. And when it was 2003, the new lieutenant governor called me in for a meeting and asked for some advice, since I've been around state government for a little while. I said, well, first bit of advice I give you is not a 2-year budget. You ought to treat it as a 4-year budget. Because if you decide we need additional revenue, you better make that prediction now, because you are new, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst. Because if you got to have more revenue, you, if you're like most of us in politics, are going to be reluctant to take the heat and ask for more money when you're on the ballot. So you ought to try and project as best you can, as guessing, how much money it will take to run the state for a 4-year cycle, what the revenue estimate will be. And then if you think you need additional money to make it through your second budget as lieutenant governor, you better go ask for that money now, because you'll be reluctant to do it. I thought it was pretty good advice. So I'm saying to you, if you think it's challenging now, wait until this year is over with and we come into the election cycle and it's challenging again. But look, this will be a chance for you to listen. They'll go through some charts and graphs. It's just better when you look at it visually. Then after that, there'll be Q&A. But thank you. I appreciate you coming. I'm impressed that this many people would show up. Did you all know it was 170 degrees, 107 degrees out there? At least that's what it said on the thermometer in my car. But it was a black car and sitting in the sun. Maybe you got a gray car, green car, blue car, and it was 100. But thank you for coming. All right?
Thank you. I did want to acknowledge some people from our county departments. We have Ms. Deidre Fontaine from Harris. Would you like to stand up? Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo, thank you for being here. Is there anyone else from any of our Harris County departments that are not with Commissioner Ellis? Okay, I know last year we had last meeting we had public health and some others. But anyways, we partner with all of them and we thank you. We'll now have Sophie Elsner come up. She'll be leading, then Dr. Will Landon, then I'll come back to give the rest of the short presentation.
Good evening. It's so nice to see all of you. I have a preliminary question. Who has already attended a budget town hall by Commissioner Ellis's office this season? Okay, this may be repetitive for some of you, but it's nice to see so many new faces. So I will briefly, so the three of us, well, let's make sure this, oh, the clicker, I forgot how fancy we are up here. Okay, so between Director Carter, Dr. Landon, and I, we'll go through where we are and how we got here in this budget situation, what's at stake, and then where we go from here. And a lot of what I'll be talking about of where we are and how we got here, Commissioner Ellis already referenced, so I'll go through it quickly, and then if you have questions at the end, we'll be happy to answer those. So first of all, okay. As Commissioner Ellis said, budgets reflect our values, and Commissioner Ellis and our team really fight for a number of core pillars, including safe neighborhoods, fair and just systems, healthy residents and workers, an environment that's resilient, especially in this region, infrastructure that's reliable, economies that are inclusive, and housing that's stable and safe and healthy for everyone. And as Director Carter mentioned, that costs money. If you don't invest, then do you really value it? So Commissioner Ellis referenced this, but Harris County is fortunate to have a growing population and be a place that people want to come to. In the last 7 years, our population has grown net by about 400,000 people, which is wonderful. We also have a lot of need. We have a really high uninsured population relative to the nation. Nearly 750,000 people, or almost 1 in 6 of our residents, live in poverty. We know we are not doing everything that needs to be done for our residents, and Commissioner Ellis will keep working to do better by all of our residents for as long as it takes. But that's hard, which we'll get to. Just a few other things. We've faced a number of disasters, ones that have been federally declared and beyond, that cost billions of dollars, which we don't always get reimbursed. And then, as you all likely know, we've had a lot of federal funding already slashed. That's been happening for years, but it's exacerbated just in the last, or for years at the state level, and it's definitely been exacerbated in the last 6 months at the federal level. We'll get to that in a minute. But so there are a few reasons how we got to this spot. And the spot that I keep referencing, which Commissioner Ellis referenced, is to do everything that Harris County wants to do to provide for its residents, the people who live here, who work here. We simply do not have enough money. To do just the things that we are doing this year, and to keep up with that level of service, we don't have enough money. So we knew that going into this year, we were going to have tough decisions. And there are a few reasons why, if you're wondering, well, why can't you just get more money? We'll get into why that's not an option and why there are some things that we're really not flexible on with our budget. So we'll talk very briefly about our caps and our revenue and why it's not so simple to find other sources to fund everything that matters for the residents of Harris County. Talk a little bit about what Commissioner Ellis, which is that there are some things like law enforcement that once you put that money in, it's locked in forever. And then as I mentioned before, additional pressures that we're facing because we're seeing slashes in federal funding. First, just want to briefly talk about revenue sources. Commissioner Ellis referenced that property tax is the primary way that the county gets dollars. It's about 80% of our revenue is from property taxes. And so when you see your property tax bill, some of that is for Harris County. Not the majority of it. It depends on where you live. My bill, 20% of it goes to Harris County and 80% goes to other places, like the city or the school districts or other taxing entities. But most of Harris County's revenue is coming from property taxes. On the other side, and to be clear, the state decides that. So that's what's here. On the other side is the state's sources of revenue, which is a lot of other sources, not property taxes. The biggest one being sales tax, which everyone pays, but usually people who have a lot less spend a lot more of their income out and about on things that are taxed with sales tax. And what Commissioner Ellis was referencing is that we have a cap on our revenue, and it's a cap for property taxes and how much local governments can collect from that, regardless of the need, regardless of how many new people you have or how many uninsured people there are, anything like that, the supports you need to provide, regardless of that, there's a cap. There's not a cap on other ways that the state can get revenue. So they can, if more people are buying more things, there's more sales tax, and the state can keep collecting that. So I just want to juxtapose those two things because I think a lot of times people just pay taxes and don't pay attention to where it goes. But if you are trying to provide services for residents, then it definitely matters how you can get revenue to put it back in your communities. So where does the money go? I'm sorry that these numbers are so small, but Commissioner Ellis was referencing that about 60% of our budget goes into law enforcement and our legal system, which is huge. And everything else is fitting into the rest. So the largest single expense is for law enforcement. That's over a third of our budget. And under state law, once you put money into a law enforcement agency, the only way that it can ever go down is if the voters have a choice and decide to do that with the budget. And so that money is locked in. That's what he was referencing about it being locked in. And we just have to understand that if Commissioner's Court raises that budget, it's not going to go down. Whereas, for example, something like a public health budget or a budget to try to prevent environmental harms, that can go down or up. But legally, there's no restriction on that. So these are kind of broken up by our biggest areas. Governance and customer service represents our elections, all of our things that keep the county running behind the scenes. So like the IT infrastructure, the county clerk's office or the tax assessor collector's office or our county attorney. It's just what keeps things going. I mentioned our legal system, that's our courts, but also the district attorney and the public defender and the civil system as well. And then up here, a lot of things that I know folks in this room have invested a lot in as well include some other priorities, but not necessarily large budget categories like housing, public health, much of which also get federal grants, or at least historically have, although we are already seeing cuts there. Our engineering and infrastructure for our operations of that, and then Commissioner's Court as well, who run community centers like this and programming in parks and roads and bridge maintenance as well. So that's kind of where the money goes, and we'd be happy to answer questions about that later. I know people might have additional questions. So I talked a little bit about capping revenue, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. Just want to stress that the only way that Commissioner's Court can consider revenue that even starts to match the growth of Harris County is to ask the voters. Otherwise, there's a hard cap set by the state, and that limits how much revenue can grow, even as need grows bigger. And Commissioner's Court has to make that decision on whether or not to even ask the voters and let the voters decide on a tax rate and a revenue rate in early August. So Commissioner's Court, and some of y'all may have attended other meetings or attended the August 7th meeting where that was discussed, and the majority of Commissioner's Court members said that they did not want to put that question on the ballot. So that's no longer up for discussion. There will not be a question on the ballot about a tax rate for general, for anything specific or broadly in the budget. I'm gonna skip this, but happy to talk charts if you want to later. We already talked a little bit about how law enforcement funding is a floor. And so right now, that 36% or over $1 billion of funds go to law enforcement, our constables and our sheriff's agencies. And you may have heard that this year, one of the priorities for a number of Commissioner's Court members was to raise law enforcement raises so that it would match the same rates as the Houston Police Department and what they just approved through their negotiations. In doing that, it will cost about $100 million for Harris County. The majority of Commissioner's Court members said that in late May, that was a priority for them at the beginning of October. And so what that means is that we were facing a deficit of over $100 million because of the revenue cap that I mentioned and just sustaining services. Then that deficit doubled. So when Director Carter mentioned that we had over a $200 billion deficit, that's about half of it is from this increase to law enforcement that will be in law enforcement agencies for the remainder of time, unless something changes externally, if that proposal goes through. And then I just want to stress here, when the law enforcement funding is sort of the top line items in our overall legal system and law enforcement spending. There are other costs, but right now, as you can see, it is over $1 billion just for sheriffs, like the work that they do out in the streets on their patrol division, the sheriff running the jail, which is the detention side, and then constables. We have 8 separate constables agencies, and each one of those combined, their budgets total about $312 million. So that's our single biggest line items right there. I think the last thing I will talk about before we get to what all this means is I just want to highlight that right now we are facing real cuts from the federal government. This is not hypothetical, although we do expect that more will come. But just in the last few months, we've learned of really, really big grants that we've lost, like the Solar for All program. We got one of the largest grants in the entire country. We were the leader for $250 million for the state of Texas to bring a lot of our grid up to 21st century standards and make solar power accessible for all sort of communities and and to have really great green jobs. Right now, that's all in limbo because the federal government about 3 weeks ago, since we started these budget town halls, announced that they were slashing this grant. There are smaller grants, but that are also incredibly important. We learned that our Institute of Forensic Sciences lost a grant that's necessary for supplies for evidence testing for survivors of sexual assault. So people who have experienced violence need to be able to have their evidence tested to have their day in court. And right now, if we don't have the supplies for that from the federal grants, since they were cut, and we don't have dollars to backfill that, like, what are we gonna do? I don't have a good answer for you. And then over the last few months, we've been losing a number of grants, especially in our public health department. Just one example is the entire division for health screenings for people who've recently arrived in this country as refugees, but there have been others that have been cut and more that we expect on the table. So that's really important because at the end of the day, our residents just need support wherever the source of funding comes from. It's our job to pay attention to that, but it matters for real people what sorts of services they have. And in Harris County, we're trying to make up for that support that we're losing, but it's harder and harder when we have even fewer resources and greater need and less support from our state and federal governments. So on that uplifting note, I will hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Will Landon.
Thank you, Sophie. So I'm Will Landon, Dr. Landon. I'm just going to talk briefly, very briefly, just a couple slides about how we got here and what's at stake. Specifically, the budget as we knew it and as we know it today, because it's shifted over time. And a lot of this has to do with new estimates that the budget team is receiving, new information that they're getting, and other ways that they're looking to balance the budget. So as of the beginning of August, I think, or no, just a few weeks ago, they presented a balanced budget and a budget book, which is publicly available. But I'll go through, we have revenue on one side and expenses on the other, just high-level buckets, but important pieces that we wanted to call out. The first thing that I want to share is the 2.8 or 2,815 million or 2.8 billion in costs just to continue the level of services at the county. So this is a really important number. The county, just like households across, the nation and are experiencing increases in costs, inflation, things like that. county operations is subject to it as well. This 2.8 billion is about 5.5% higher than the adopted budget for this fiscal year, for 2025. So it's a slight increase. It seems like a lot, but that was what we were facing just to continue the same level of services that we had this previous year. Now, through tax revenue alone, we were looking at being able to receive about 2.2 billion. So there's a large gap there, but there are some additional sources of revenue. And so you can see that with the additional revenue, and specifically some one-time revenue pieces from, as Commissioner talked about it, sale of a property, taking from some one-time funding streams, we arrived at a projected revenue of 2.77 billion. And similarly with the cost side, with the expense side, the 2.8 grew even higher with the law enforcement pay raises that were decided upon outside of the budget cycle. And then as the budget team tried to balance the budget, they looked at some savings and cuts that were going to reduce that expense by about 146 million. So that's cuts to departments in various forms, but also included some different estimates for projected expenses. So they projected the cost to outsource inmates to jails at a lower rate than we might have anticipated otherwise. So there's some different ways that they're doing it. We don't necessarily agree with all of the estimates that they've come up with. But that led us to where we are today. So again, budget season started. We were looking at about a $275 million shortfall just at the beginning. It was somewhat balanced with some different methods that the budget team used. And at the last court, it has adjusted since then. So it was about balanced, as they would say. But the court decided that they were not going to balance the shortfall and the cuts with employee benefits. And so our commissioner made motions to protect the healthcare benefits and the pension benefits of county staff and retirees. And they were passed at court. And then there were additional expenses as well. So that was about 27 million in benefits. Another 11 were added that day just for park security. And we had 10 less due to changes in constable contracts. Getting into the weeds, but what it led to was a slightly lower revenue and a slightly higher expense than what they had balanced. And we arrived at another $48 million deficit. So the budget team should come back with another balanced budget soon. We're looking forward to hearing more about how they're going to address the remaining deficit currently. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Director Carter.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Landon. So as you know, I'm a little more political, so I'll be a little more direct. And so I, Erica Lee Carter, do not consider the budget balanced, but there have been cuts. There have been one-time savings, like when you sell a property or where you take money from that was already designated somewhere but not spent, and you say, okay, we're going to designate it to reduce the deficit, but it can only happen in that 1 year. And so it was balanced. Some use the word efficiencies, and we've heard that word on the federal level, but I use the word cuts. So we reached out to our departments within the last 2 weeks, and this is from the original $250 million deficit. They had to make reductions initially, And so we wanted to know the actual impacts that are happening as is before we added an additional, before the court added an additional 48 million in deficit that they will discuss tomorrow. So that's what they'll focus on tomorrow. You'll keep hearing that 48 million, but some of these cuts have already been considered, and nothing is final. All of this could change. September 9th, they'll do what they call amendments, where you can add money or take money away. So even saying it's balanced when it's not a final budget, I think kind of causes confusion. But just to date, in environment, which if you saw the original pie chart was at 0%. It's really our smallest amount from our general operating. They would be cutting air monitoring, emergency environmental response, ability to be on call for environmental incidents, which there in our county is at least 1 per day. And then, we want to be proactive. We have a lot of people with asthma. We have cancer clusters. We have soil that needs testing. But it reduces their ability to be proactive throughout our communities. I know in Precinct 1 we face a lot of concrete batch plants and challenges that we get calls and want to address. In public health, she said when asked on August 14th, they already had a nearly $4 million cut, so that's in the balanced budget. That's what part of it made it balanced. And so at court, she said, we tried really hard to find efficiencies, but with nearly $4 million in cuts requested of us, that will have some impact, which they spread it across all their divisions. They don't want to cut it all from your maternal health care or all for chronic disease and prevention, so they did spread it through those programs. They won't be able to serve as many moms. They'll be able to do a citation to say this property or home is a nuisance, but they won't be able to fix it. And of course, mosquitoes, which carry disease in our community, they won't be able to spray as often or as frequently. So that's already. And so we talked to our foster care. They are really vulnerable. They're wards of the state. They've been taken from their families. And right now we would be increasing caseloads, which are already pretty overburdened. There might be delays. We limit therapy access. We have, of course, a lot of languages in our community, and so there would be some challenges with bilingual therapy, reaching as broad as it needs to reach across our great county. Options for Saturday clinics. We have a lot of busy families, and reducing access for caregivers, and potentially even cutting our vouchers for clothing for our children that are in our foster youth. And you know how fast children grow. And then we have an office. I don't want to name the specific office because they're very statutory, but they said each dollar cut is absorbed by our overburdened staff. I mean, you've gone in to try to get something from the county. Many of you, maybe you've had a long line. We're trying. It'll impact the public, the legal community, and the courts that rely on our office. And then in our criminal legal system, and the district attorney's office has been very public about the work they're doing. It's not just to lock people up, but it's also to help victims receive justice. It's also to reduce our criminal case backlog. It's also to make sure our jail isn't overcrowded and people aren't dying in that jail. So we can't just look at it as the prosecutor just throwing away the key. It's a whole system of support. And they do things that we have started, a mental health and diversion bureau, right? The jail shouldn't be the largest mental health facility in our state. They actually need to go where they can get mental health care. And so that's what the DA is trying to do. They have a domestic violence bureau, which really to specialize and expedite those cases and help those victims get resolution and be safe. Our intake and grand jury bureau, because you can't have a trial if you don't have a grand jury. And so this is an exact quote from the district attorney. I won't read it to you, but they want to resolve these cases. They don't want everyone just sitting there with our new DA. And this is a little in the weeds. This is a little small office that helps assign counsel. Those who cannot afford to pay, they have a right to counsel. But there could be delays there. There could be delays on these persons in jail being able to see an attorney, reducing their partnership, their community engagement specialists, client transportation. How do they get to where they need to go for pre-trial or to get their cases moving along and completed? It's on both sides, for the victims to have resolution and for our jail not to be overcrowded. So I would say from actual information from our departments, we contest that there have been no cuts already. we would probably say, or I am showing you, the departments have said there are going to be impacts that have already occurred. And as the deficit fluctuates each court, when they make different decisions, then they might have to do additional things to different departments. And then keeping in mind that law enforcement, especially the boots on the ground part, that part of the funding is, we can't touch that. So we're actually having to look at just the smaller part of the pie for where to make. Some people call efficiencies, other people may call offsets, I may call it cuts. And then for those who've been familiar with all the great new programming we added through the Biden-Harris allocation that we got at the beginning of the pandemic, there is nowhere where we've been able to put general fund program money to sustain these programs. So these aren't all ending this year, but some of them will start winding down in September of 26, was basically within the new fiscal year, or by December, early December of the next fiscal year. And if we don't have other funds, or doesn't look like our federal government's gonna start new grants for these areas, but unless we do that, we really won't be able to sustain some of these programs that you may have just thought was part of the county at this point, because we've been doing them 3 or 4 years, but they were actually additional programs. Oops, sorry. I think I don't know what I did. Okay, went wrong place. Did I go the wrong way? No. I don't know what I did. Okay, so that's the last one. So, Catherine, if you have questions, we'll start picking them up, because we're on question time. So looking ahead, I think we referenced this several times, but the court did not choose to move forward a tax rate. So that happened August 7th. I think Dr. Landon mentioned protecting employee health care benefits and the pension fund. And tomorrow, again, you will see on the agenda, public agenda, it's posted already, they will be discussing elected official pay, which includes the elected constables. Elected officials, all of them are paid any salary increases are completely separate from our over 15,000 county employees. So if the court voted 4% for all county employees, that has nothing to do with your elected JPs, any of your elected officials. That has to be considered either individually or by the commissioner's court. And the elected constables came to the court and asked for a pay increase, for a salary increase. What is the number? What's the increase? They asked for, within 1 year, $114,000 increase. So that was discussed on August 14th. And so they didn't make a final vote, and so there will be further discussion tomorrow, because they're elected officials and they want to discuss. Whereas there's no specific pay increase outside of law enforcement right now that has been put or really proposed on the table. So I think we're going to take questions now. So has anyone turned in questions? And thank you. So that concludes the main part of our presentation. Thank you. Right now I have the calendar up, so I don't know if you can see it, but those are the upcoming meetings. So we'll take questions. No one's walking them up to me, so I can't read them. Oh, I see they're at the back doing something. Y'all start walking up though. Y'all walk up. I can at least start with one. I don't want to, they're waiting. Thank you. And I might not answer all of them, because Sophie and Dr. Landon have a lot of knowledge, so I just okay, we're trying to start from general budget. Okay. Thank you for passing along institutional knowledge. How many vacancies do we currently have in law enforcement?
It's a great question. If whoever asked it is willing to identify themselves, I will get you the best number. Okay, I see you. I will get you the best number I can. But what I will say is I can do quick addition with a sheet I am holding, but I don't think it's fully right. And this is actually a much bigger issue of moving pieces of information all the time, partly with something like vacancies, because a position could be filled today and then someone leaves tomorrow, or vacant today and someone comes in tomorrow. But I do want to say about law enforcement specifically, I only talked about how the state law prevents or makes sure that law enforcement budgets can never be reduced, but it actually also says that you can't ever reduce the number of officers, including or officer positions, including vacancies. And so I think it is important to know that when you're looking for efficiencies, and you might want to say, oh, if we've never been able to fully staff, this department or something, that might be a place where you would normally look, but not for law enforcement. Those positions are always basically baked into the budget. That said, I will get you the number. I know it's in the hundreds. The sheriff's office alone has, I think, almost 150 vacant positions on their detention side. It's very hard to staff the jail fully, but once you count all of the sheriff and constables, it's much more than that, and I'll let you know.
So we probably stay up here, but I'll do our best. Our federal funding and grants part of the county budget of $2.8 billion. Actually, no. So we have nearly $5 billion in federal grants, but keep in mind that includes our flood control projects. There are a lot of Army Corps of Engineers, community development and block grant funding, large blocks of funding in our housing division. At the same time, our county administration office is tracking, and not those ones I just mentioned, but other longstanding grants are in a tenuous situation due to the new administration. So it's like a continuous update as the new administration puts their stamp on federal funding. Are the cuts proportionate to the needs of the respective precincts? So that question, what I would say is when I showed the pie chart, that's the countywide chart. Okay. And in all of our programs, our current court asks them to try to implement programs with equity and using data like social vulnerability. Where are the zip codes with the greatest need, the areas with the greatest need? So if public health is doing maternal health care program and they know Black women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth, they're gonna try to direct their outreach to those zip codes or areas that have had high statistics. So it's not always equal by precinct anyways. It's more about addressing the key needs of the community. Or if we have an election and there's no election in Pasadena, but there's an election in Katy, well, we're gonna put more polling locations in Katy. So that may or may not, we can come back to that question if I didn't answer it. As we are facing a significant budget cut, will you consider cost-effective preventative solutions like expanding access to healthy, affordable, plant-based foods that are proven to reduce chronic disease, environmental impact, promote food equity, especially in underserved communities? These are things we have in place that we have a food pharmacy in our Harris Health that is designed to get food out into the streets. Commissioner Ellis and several on the court are interested in preventative programs. That's what we use a lot of our federal, our ARPA dollars for when we had them. It's just right now what we're not cutting all preventative programs. I don't want to suggest that. We're not cutting all prevention. But it certainly is a slight, what I would consider a shrinkage of some, and the opportunity for some of the new ideas will decrease over time if we continue on this path. Dr. Landon may want to answer this, or Catherine. I don't see infrastructure in the budget, flood, disaster prevention, drainage roads. Can you compare Harris County budget where the money goes chart to other counties in the country? So we might come back while they think about it, unless you want to start. You got to answer it now. Okay.
Also think more about the comparison piece, but
Flood control is its own taxing entity, and so it has a separate tax from the maintenance and operations tax that we're talking about here in this presentation. And at the last election cycle, we actually voted to increase that tax slightly so that they would have a larger budget for all the maintenance work on capital projects. That was Prop A in the last election. And so you don't see it here because we're really talking about that M&O budget. We're really talking about the maintenance and operations and the general fund, which the county has a lot of flexibility to administer. Flood control has its own budget through its tax, and so they manage it accordingly. Maintenance work and other infrastructure building work there. I know other counties also have flood districts, but I'm not sure exactly how they might compare to Harris County, but Harris County being one of the largest probably has a similar large-sized flood control district. So I think
The second question was about this slide. Like, is this distribution similar to other counties around the country? We need to get back to you.
I think what we've, and Sophie might be able to confirm, I do believe the investment in the legal system and law enforcement, those are probably going to look similar in most counties in terms of the proportion of the budget that they account for.
Yeah, we might look it up while we're here. I would say our investment in environment is probably lower than other counties that have done it longer and more dedicated. Dr. Landon, you probably will be up here for this. How does the tax rate compare to other similar sized counties? Where does Harris County fall in funding?
Sure. Yeah, I did look at that, and I'll come back to the tax rate in just a second. I did want to say one other thing. Part of the way that budget department has aimed to balance the budget was to decrease contributions to our PIC fund, and that's the rainy day fund that we have set aside to address disasters and issues like that. So just when we were thinking of flood infrastructure, that is one piece that we include in our budget. Right now, this year we're not slated to make that 10 million contribution because of the deficit that we're facing. But going back to the taxing piece, Harris County is not one of the largest in terms of like the tax rate at Harris County compared to other counties. Fort Bend, one of our neighbors, has one of the higher across all counties in Texas. Harris County's fairly middle of the road. You might be surprised to hear.
But maybe our houses are worth more, so it seems like you're paying more. So it's two parts that influence how much you pay. It's what someone says your house is worth, and then it's the actual rate that the county is applying to that, to your square footage and your value. This is a good question. What happens if the county cannot balance the budget before the fiscal year starts or the deadline approaches? So, unlike the federal government, the county, nor the state, nor the city, we cannot print money. We're not allowed to run a deficit budget. So the deadline is basically September 30th of 2025. There needs to be 4 people attend a meeting, that's a minimum for quorum, and at least 3 people to vote yes on the budget. We have had this where there wasn't an agreement in 2022, and so there was basically a forced budget, and it gets left up to your budget office, the Office of Management and Budget. So basically state law would say if they have not, the 3 elected people agreed to a budget, there'll be a tax rate forced by the state law, and then the budget office kind of gets to decide whatever happens.
The state budget office?
No, the county budget office, yes, sorry. And that did. I mean, and usually they try to do most of what they've already put out in public books, but they don't really have to, right? Because what?
That year, they did a reduction across.
Well, in the year I'm referring to, 2022, there was like an automatic reduction across departments, But we were also more in a surplus year though. So it didn't have the same as it might have this year, where we're already in a deficit. Okay, that might have caused more confusion. So is there a sustainability plan in place to ensure that the services currently funded through ARPA, which are some of the ones I had at the end, like Apprenticeship Advantage, our summer youth program, some of our eviction legal aid, can continue once the 1/3 or the funding ends next year? Right now, I would not say there's a clear plan. We have information, we have costs, we have evaluations ongoing. There is some effort to get private philanthropy involved, but remember the county received $915 million. That grew to $975 million. Right now, I don't think we would find a philanthropist to do that entire amount. And so the amounts we're getting, it won't be everything. It won't be, the easiest way for it to be sustained would be for just put some of it in our general operating. I'll get to your second question, but I'll go to other questions. And this kind of related, I think I kind of already answered this about opportunities for philanthropy to identify one-time funding for programs that are under threat of shutting down in 2026. This is in a challenging philanthropic environment. We have nonprofits that have cut entire divisions already because they have lost federal funding. We're closing an immigration support program because the nonprofit we were contracting with lost their federal grant that would supported the majority of the staff. So the county's contribution to that staff was not enough to keep that program going. So we're competing against, not that we want to compete, but I'm just saying philanthropy is being asked to fill in the gap. The Houston Food Bank received a federal funding cut. And so it's a very challenging environment. So I think, not that we do have a grants office, but it's a very difficult time. Okay, let's see, 2 mental health questions, so I'll ask those. What are the commissioners doing about mental health services in the budget? And this kind of relates. Mental health support after children get out of foster care. Commissioner Ellis, and I think I do want you to talk about HEART as you come up, certainly believes in prevention, certainly agrees and has supported investing and addressing mental health needs. He has consistently said the jail should not be the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas. It is actually why he had our hospital system, Harris Health, the same people that do Ben Taub or LBJ, take over the healthcare, because we basically kind of had the sheriff's office running healthcare. Well, that's not their skill set, right? So when he had the hospital system take it over, bring in higher level, more knowledgeable doctors, have better systems for checking and getting those that are in, because not everyone, the majority in our jail are not yet convicted. They're awaiting trial, but we are mandated and should give them care. So he has been leading and making sure that people, not just incarcerated, but others, receive care. Sophie's going to tell you about one of their major programs.
So one of the programs that Commissioner Ellis really called for and has been championing is our holistic assistance response team, which shows up when people are experiencing a bunch of different situations, but including a mental health crisis or even just a mental health negative situation. But it may also be situations where people are experiencing homelessness or extreme poverty or other health impacts. And historically, law enforcement has been the only responder in those situations. And we know that that isn't the best use of law enforcement's time, and it's not the right response for people who need that support. So program HEART, the Holistic Assistance Response Team, and any programs like that are really about getting the right response to people in the moment and then connecting them with longer-term care, which may or may not be mental health care. Just wanted to also stress, related to mental health care, we are definitely not meeting the needs of the community as a region, and I think that's important to recognize. And with those funds from the Biden-Harris administration through the American Rescue Plan Act, one of the things that this county decided to invest in was mental health supports, especially for youth, which we hadn't done enough of, except maybe through the criminal legal system or through the foster youth system or things like that. And I'll just say one thing that's really scared me in reading the proposed budget documents, and right now, a lot of this budget tries to keep as much mental health support funding as possible, what has been proposed so far. But a lot of departments said if we have to make deeper cuts, one of the only places that we can do it is in community-based mental health or wraparound supports, because those aren't things that are mandated by state law. They're things, usually, they're things that are important and we know are really effective, but if they're not required, then that's where people start looking for cuts. And so I don't have, besides what Director Carter mentioned, I don't necessarily have all those specifics. It's just what we've seen in kind of the contingency plan. And so as we're thinking about 48 million more cuts on the line, that could mean even more cuts for mental health services.
Dr. Landon will help answer this question. That's why I went to this slide. Has your team received any feedback from Precinct 3's office, Commissioner Precinct 3 and Commissioner Precinct 4's team, as to why they feel there isn't a $200 million shortfall? So I think he's going to reiterate this a little bit, and I'm happy to finish it.
Sure. I think a lot of it is a strong reliance on the budget team and a belief that, as you can see here, you know, at the end of the day, they're going to find some numbers that are going to allow for the revenue to match the expenses. I think the other piece that we really saw was that with these cuts and savings, again, we are not sure, based on our research, our knowledge of these programs, that some of the predicted expenses are as low as the budget team would say they are. And then as well, in terms of cuts to departments, there was a real effort, I think, on the department's sides to try not to cut positions, whether they were filled or not. And they did their best to do that, but there's only so much money that they can pull out of their travel budgets, out of their supplies budgets. And I think it gets very into the weeds, into the details of the budgets to really figure out where the cuts are coming from and what the actual impacts are going to be. I think sometimes the departments themselves are not completely clear as well, because there's been this moving target over time. So we talked about like the $275 million deficit that shrank to the 250, that shrank to the 200, based on, again, these kind of finding additional, tax dollars and adjusting some of the estimates and predictions. But I think that's the big part of it. I think the other piece, and I hope I'm not saying anything too controversial, I don't know that they're as interested in talking about the deficit that was imposed by 3 of the 5 members of court. There's a large, half of the deficit that went towards these pay raises that were not negotiated, they were just decided outside of the budget cycle.
Yeah, and I'll finish on that point. Commissioner Ellis has led on trying to raise the pay of our lowest paid county employees. Unlike the city of Houston or our school districts, the county does not have steps or levels in our salaries. So until he did the livable wage, we had employees making sometimes less than $15 an hour or not even $15 an hour. And so he raised that to $20 an hour. And that's still before they try to pay into getting any health benefits. We also had employees, so every year they didn't know if they were even getting 1%, 2% cost of living. We didn't have any regular increase. And we still don't have currently, I'm a level 10 employee. If I do this, I can work and get to 11, 12, level 11, and this is my salary range. So he led in trying to create that. It's called pay equity. And they said, oh, we have to study it. We have to get everyone's titles. We have to know if you're a clerk or if you're a fire marshal, is that the same job as a constable deputy, whatever. Law enforcement was included in this study. So we were going to have everyone on a more regular cadence, improving the equity of pay, and ensure you could clearly understand if you wanted promotion and growth and reduce the inequitable gaps between departments as well. And so that was going to take several years. And so what we mean by the $102 million is basically at one court meeting because of some requests, and every department was requesting. We have in our judicial system in the district clerk's office, she's talked openly about it. They get paid hourly. They have to pay the expensive downtown parking. They don't get parking spots. They're coming in late at night. They want extra pay. And we're trying to recognize that. And they were in this study to try to have consistent pay and understanding for their work. But at that one meeting in May, there was a request and 3 court members responded, and they didn't say, let's study. They said, let's put it into our budget process immediately. And so our deficit at that time had been projected at $130 million. And I have the slides from that meeting, happy to share with anyone that wants the slides from our budget office. And so that added, at the time in the meeting, if you go to the transcript, he was like, it may be $100 million, it may be $140 million. When they went down to the details of how many positions, they landed closer to $100 million into our FY26 budget process. And that was money we had to account for that we had not planned to. And I will also, I guess, close on this section by saying, you know, I told you earlier, we started this process way at the very early part of May. They asked every department, submit a potential 10% reduction. What would you change? What could you be more efficient at? And so we have literally a document, 3,000 pages long, where they wrote down positions and what would be the effect, and is it required by state law, federal law, et cetera. So we have these details that show, you know, there may be a little bit of efficiencies. And the smaller your department, the harder it is to be efficient. You're probably operating at the bare minimum. We have some very tiny departments that do a mighty work, like our environmental office. Okay. I will move to the last couple of questions. I don't know if anyone has said anyone since. You can still raise your cards. If this budget unfortunately passes, how can we in the community and community advocates work with the commissioners, the judge, to minimize our community involvement with law enforcement? I think Sophie can come and answer this. And the judiciary system by cutting what is mislabeled as public safety in order to fund the real public safety that comes in forms of community programs, resources, and assistance.
So we don't know what budget will pass, and I do want to stress that Commissioners Court plans to vote on a budget on September 18th, because they have to have one by the end of September, and that's our last scheduled meeting. But so keep pushing for what you want, whether that's more in one direction or another, and there are 5 members of the Commissioners Court, and all of you are their bosses. But whatever budget does pass, not everyone is going to see everything that they value in it, and we know that not every need in Harris County will be addressed. So I think every opportunity you have, you should be meeting with commissioners. You should be speaking directly or publicly, whatever makes sense to you, for the things that you know make your community safe. And so I know a number of people in this room have talked about how that may look like good jobs, or accessible parks, or mental health supports outside of the legal system, or so many different things. I've seen a bunch of different proposals, and all of these do contribute to what makes our community safe and healthy. Maybe clean air or water that you can drink. And I would just say that we've seen the impact of residents speaking up about what matters to you. I already talked about the Holistic Assistance Response Team program, and I'll just use it as an example. That program has grown in the last few years. It came out of a call from our community that we needed this type of service, and we were really lacking this in Harris County. and it has grown and sustained in spite of some real attacks because community members said, I now know what it means to have this, and I knew what it meant to not. Please don't take this away. And so sometimes that does look like showing up at Commissioner's Court, but sometimes it's also saying that a Commissioner's Court member needs to meet with you in your group and talk about what matters in the budget. Or beyond the budget, just continue. But I think the last thing I would just say is budget season is year-round. And so even as soon as Commissioner's Court adopts a budget for this fiscal year, we should all be thinking about continuing what it looks like for just, fair, safe communities and not wait until August. I know many people in this room haven't been, but I just want to stress that. I don't know if you want to add anything else about it.
Thank you, said it. Well done. Now, I asked earlier if there were any county employees. This question I think may come from a county employee. If they want to come up, they can. But I'm happy to read the question and try to respond. We are worried about the loss of data and information, both nationally, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and here with the proposed loss to Harris County's research department. Can you speak to this? And then this kind of aligns with it about the continually, or some of the court have brought up $10 million that the county sets aside for external consultants to complete analytical, strategic reports. Oftentimes, these reports go over cost and contain poor methodology. An example was given, Korn Ferry's salary report, which was discussed publicly. Given this, does the commissioner support the proposal to cut the entire research and analysis division, whose commissioner requested to be created in 2019? If not, will the commissioner oppose this proposal? So I don't know if anyone's here directly from that division, but I'm happy to hear from you directly. And I don't know if the 10 million, I know the consultants, and we have a lot of different projects going on. I guess how I would answer that is he was for raising revenue. He brought a motion for a tax rate August 7th. He's actually brought a motion for 2024 to raise revenue because after Hurricane Beryl last year and other disasters, I've been working on budget 5 years. We saw the trends. We saw that the way it was going with the state laws that were capping our ability to have revenue, locking in our law enforcement, we were going to have challenges. He couldn't get the votes last year to put a tax rate on the ballot. The only thing that was put was dedicated to flood control. And so he's also said consistently that he is concerned about staff that are going to lose their jobs, which includes the research division. But there also has been some limited transparency on some departments that we don't know exactly what positions are being cut. We've spent a lot of time as staff trying to ask departments, and some of them were unaware of the total of their reduction. So we would say, hey, did you know they were cutting $800,000? They say, oh, wait, I haven't heard that yet. And so they wouldn't be able to tell us who might get cut or what might get cut. So I would say overall, he has not been as pleased with some of the decisions thus far, but we continue to emphasize it is not over. There'll be more discussions tomorrow, more votes tomorrow, and the last big chance is September 9th, where he can add back in things or subtract out bad things that have been going on. Bad may be a little strong. Things that he does not agree with, that he would not want included in the budget, that's harming our community, not advancing health, wellness, environmental justice, housing, things that he has fought for his entire career. So,
I'm sorry. How many million is that? How many received? How many million is that?
in revenue, yeah. So basically 2.2 billion, but that's just the way to put it. So everything's in millions, yeah. But 2.2 billion is a simpler way to say it. Yes. Yes, got it. So I know some of you do better in small groups, so we're going to stick around if you have questions that were not answered. Catherine, raise your hand. Sophie, Dr. Landon, myself, we're on the policy division. I want to thank Community Affairs and Advocacy. We have Bryce and Patrick still here, and some of their team if you have outreach or other engagement. You can always email, were you supposed to do something, closing out?
Dane was supposed to do closing remarks.
Well, but he's not here. Oh, he's doing something. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say, these are the meeting dates if anyone needed to take a picture, because I think I mentioned them several times. There's a court email, which you cannot see, but you can always see at the back of the room. They take email comments, so you can't come back. You can email your comments. It goes to all the court offices, or you can come in person. We don't have virtual testimony anymore, but you can send emails. And we're continuing to get them every day about different opinions of the county or the budget. Daniel, are you closing out, or are we? Okay. Okay, well then, again, thank you. I think your voice is what's most important in this process, and we hope that you engage. And thank you for engaging tonight. We enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something, and we're going to keep pressing on. And then get in. Good night.